Uh,
Yep.
yes, yes.
Okay, so we'll be talking about the physics of two-qubit gates, but before we move into the physics, we need to understand a few points like how do we get into it. So this is the full stack quantum computation, as you can see, and you can see that we will be focusing on the quantum chip level, that is a hardware implementation. But this requires qubits, right? And whenever we think of qubits, it means atoms, but we cannot realize atoms. So we need to make something called artificial atoms, and it's something in the macro level. So we are moving from the quantum to classical level. But as you move up in this computational stack structure, you'll be getting microarchitectures, then quantum instruction set architectures, and so forth. And at the top, you will find quantum algorithm, and like which are very much abstract mathematical modelings. And as you move down, you'll be getting more of physics, and as you move up, it will be more abstract mathematical concepts. And because these things like when we are thinking of some quantum algorithm, it should be perfectly like no noise is there, but that's not always the case. So we do have noises, and that's why we need to control these coherence times and then dephasing rates. So so basically be focusing on this layer, the very foundations of this quantum computation. Now, what's available out there? So we can implement it in a variety of techniques. Like there are trapped ions, NV centers, superconducting qubits, silicon dots, topological qubits, spin qubits, and the most widely used research topic is like the superconducting qubits. But that does not mean that the others are less relevant today, because trapped ions and spin qubits are also gaining wide momentum now. But it has been seen that the tech giants and the industrial giants like Google, IBM, they are focusing more on superconducting qubits. In fact, Google's Sycamore architecture is based on superconducting qubits. So yeah, and
Okay. Okay.
why?
I like to add a point over here. Like, it's not like that superconducting qubit is the only savior in this field. Like, NV centers and trapped ion silicon dots, they all have a potential to contribute in this field. But what matters is that the underlying condition that we are applying for building a quantum chip. Like, when you are only concerned with the issue of connectivity, then we generally focus on the trapped ions. Like the connectivity is stronger in trapped ions if we compare the others. But in superconducting qubits, if we want to concern the gate fidelity or the computational speed, then you usually operate within superconducting qubits. And that's it.
Yeah, so there are various kind of superconducting architectures available. Like you have XMONs, transmons, QMONs, quatroniums, fluxoniums. But now we'll be focusing more on transmon qubits, and the reason is that the physics is super easy, right? Like it's very easy, and it's much more scalable and sustainable than the other architectures available. And as a matter of fact, these superconducting qubits, like the transmon qubits, can be thought of as oscillators, and they are not the classical harmonic oscillators that we have read of. They are some kind of anharmonic nonlinear oscillators. And okay, so we'll be talking about that next few slides. So why we use superconducting qubits? Because they'll become a savior when we run into the regime of quantum supremacy. That is, when we'll find that we have reached a point that classical computers are no longer standing in front of these quantum computers. It will be then that these superconducting qubits will be very much like robust in that regard. Also, they are much more scalable and sustainable. And of course, the key idea is that the physics is much more easier. So it's very easy.
Okay, so before moving on to the quantum gates, it's very efficient that if we can compare the difference between a classical gate and a quantum gate, then it will be very easy for us to understand the things in a detailed manner. Okay, so next slide. Yes. Okay. So the main difference that lies between a quantum gate and a classical gate is the concept of reversibility. Like in a classical gate, when we apply input, like in this case, we're applying in the x and y as an input. Then it goes through the gate. It performs some task. It goes through some processes. Then finally, we get some output. It's stated as z here. But when you are operating the same thing through a quantum gate, what happens is that we can attain the value of z through x and y. Not only that, we can attain the values of x and y through z also. And that's where comes the concept of reversibility. Just giving an example, like if you consider example of classical AND gate, using a two state input like 0 and 1. Obviously there will be a four probabilities: 0 0 0 1 1 0 and 1 1, right? 0 1 and 1 0 will give output as 0 and 1 1 will give output as 1. Fine. Now consider the same thing that we are uh, operating through a classical gate. We are given the output as 0, but at the same time we can't define that for this particular output 0 we have a particular input. Like for the particular output 0 we have three probabilities: either it can be 0 1, the input can be 0 1, it can be 0 0, or it can be 1 0. Because this particular state, that is x and y in a classical gates, they are more like a value than a state. But in these quantum gates, my 0 0 0 1 and 1 0 are not only the values, they can be represented as a vector in my q sphere or in my Bloch sphere. So that generally distinguishes the states. And yes, we can, and by that we can attain easily the values of input through the output. Basically, in fact, there is no such called inputs or outputs in a quantum gates. What we call is that is the states only, and it generally depends upon the our frame of measurement. Like where do we want to measure actually? If we go through the z, then we attain the values of x and y, and if we go through the x and y, then you can attain the value of z. So it's super efficient quantum gates if we compare with the classical gates. And mathematically this concept is being achieved through a thing known as unitary matrix. We'll be looking more into this. Basically all the quantum gates has its own unitary matrix, and yes, we'll be looking into the detailed one in our upcoming slides. Okay.
Okay, so now the classification of these 2-qubit gates, like you have flux tunable gates and microwave gates. In flux tunable gates, you are basically tuning the local magnetic flux of any of the qubits. And when you do so, the frequency is changing. What I mean by frequency is that, well, when I say frequency or the resonant frequency of a qubit, it means that it is the resonant frequency of the anharmonic oscillator, which I had just mentioned. Because I said that any transmon qubit can be thought of as if it is equivalent to a quantum non-anharmonic oscillator. So that is why we can think of its resonant frequency, and we are changing it over by tuning the flux. But there are some limitation with these flux tunable gates, like because you're introducing a new channel like flux control knob. That is why there'll be a new noise channel introduced, and there are many other disadvantages. That is why we have microwave gates. In microwave gates, basically we send microwave pulses to switch the gate to on and off condition, and here the frequency and the flux is constant. So it's fairly different from the flux tunable gates, but it's much better than the flux tunable gates. And as you can see, these are the examples. Like ISWAP and CFACE comes under the category of flux tunable, and CR, MAP, and BSWAP will come under the category of microwave gates. Okay, so now Rahul will talk about ISWAP gate.
Okay, so moving on to the first gate under flux tunability mechanism, that is ISWAP gate. So basically what it does is that it swaps the state, it swaps the condition of the states. Like in this case, you can see that you see the right side of this slide, you can see the function. It basically swaps the excitations. Preferably, it swaps the states between 0 1 and 1 0. I will explain later that why it is only swapping the states 0 1 and 1 0. That is because of mostly it favors the low energy gaps. And yes, in addition to that, while swapping them, it also adds a phase I to their amplitudes. Okay, just like in the example, you can see that the 0 1 state is getting swapped. Shagnik, can you please put on the pointer here? So it will be more.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so you can see that this state 0 1 is getting swapped into 1 0, and not only that, it adds an phase of minus I to it. Similar goes with the state of 1 0, where it gets swapped into 0 1, and again it adds an amplitude of minus I. Okay, so as it is for the 2 qubits only, so the matrix that is to be considered for an ISWAP gate is 4 into 4 matrix. If we go by the 1 qubit state only, then it would be a 2 into 2 matrix.
Because there are 4 computational states. Like if you're considering 1 qubit, then there'll be 0 and 1. And if you're considering 2 qubits, there is 0 0 0 1 1 0 and 1 1. So because there are 4 computational states, so there'll be a 4 cross 4 matrix, and that will, and when you multiply it with a state, so something will happen, and That's very
Yes,
interesting. Like,
as you can see that this matrix contains the complex term, the i's. So the name iswap, that is justified over here. And yes, moving on to the properties, the property number one, that is it's an entangling gate. Okay, so now what is meant by a entangling gate? Okay, an entangling gate basically say it takes the states as input, and it produces the output that is in some entangled form, means in such a state that it cannot be factored into any kind of isolated components. It is in qubit 1 or qubit 2. It's basically a combination of both qubit 1 or qubit 2. Second point is that it's a Clifford gate. Now it's a very important point. Like ISWAP gate is one of the Clifford gate. Actually, we have four Clifford gates available in quantum computation: the ISWAP gate, swap gate, Hadamard gate, and the CNOT gate. So basically, what Clifford gate does is that if we construct any kind of quantum circuits based on the Clifford gates, then the algorithm, the quantum algorithm that is produced from that particular circuit, can be efficiently simulated in any classical computer. Like we can efficiently simulate in an polynomial order, which is quite efficient rather than an exponential order. So in this way, Clifford gate is very efficient. And third number point is symmetric gate. As you can see from the matrix, is that if we transpose this matrix, it attains the same value again. So mathematically, it's symmetric. And for the last point, it's basically the XX plus YY interaction, means that the ISWAP gate performs the interaction, or basically helps to communicate between the X basis and the Y basis. Actually, there are three bases if we consider from the point of view of Bloch pair or Q pair. There are three bases, X, Y, and Z. So it communicates between X and Y. This last point will make some sense as we will move into the derivation of the ISWAP gate. So yes, next slide. Okay, when I have said earlier that each and every gate has its own unitary matrix. So here we are deriving this particular unitary matrix for the ISWAP gate. Before deriving any kind of matrix, what we have to take into consideration is that its underlying Hamiltonian. Basically, when two qubits interact in themselves, there there are basically three kinds of Hamiltonians: the absolute or the internal Hamiltonian of the two qubits, that is Hamiltonian qubit 1 and qubit 2, and their interaction Hamiltonian. But what we are basically interested in, that we are while defining a gate, because sorry, while deriving this gate, we are basically interested in the interaction Hamiltonian, because it actually affects the dynamics of the system. The absolute Hamiltonian don't actually affect the dynamics of the system. It remains static over the process, so it's neglected over here. So you can see that we have taken the interaction Hamiltonian, which is nothing but the tensor product between the two states. Here sigma is denoting for the states here. Sigma y1 means the energy state of qubit 1, and sigma y2 means the energy state of qubit 2. And it's been scaled by some factor. You can see that it's a scalar factor known as G, where G is defining as the coupling strength. Okay, by the coupling strength, here I mean that these two qubits are capacitively coupled between each other. When you are talking about the flux tunability, the capacitive coupling comes into the picture rather than inductive coupling or something like that. And to be very specific about it, the capacitive coupling is direct. That means the two qubits are coupled among themselves in a direct way. There is no any kind of resonator block in between which is hindered. Like in the CR gate, in the cross resonance gate, we will see that the capacitive coupling is not direct, it is indirect. So if we attain a direct capacitive coupling between two qubits, then what happens is that the frequency of the qubits that Shagnik mentioned earlier becomes a function of the local magnetic flux. Its local magnetic flux, like my omega 1 becomes dependent, sorry, my omega 1 becomes dependent on the phi of 1, and my omega 2 becomes dependent on phi of 2, like that. Okay, so here I am expanding this above equation, this equation number 1 into equation number 2, and of course there is some mathematical steps in between. There is some rigorous mathematics in between. We need not to go in them, just we have to understand the intuitive physics behind it. Okay, so after that we have expanded this term. Then you can see that there is a tensor product again here, and sigma plus sigma minus generally means that Sigma plus means that my qubit state has been absorbed above one state. Like my level one has been moved to level two, and sigma minus means that the photon is emitted over one state. Means sigma two has been moved on to my level two has been moved on to level one. That's it. You can create an analogy as a creation or annihilation operator here. Okay. So as you are expanding this term here, there is a two term and there is a two term here. So obviously we will get four terms over here on multiplying it. Sigma plus into sigma minus, sigma plus into sigma minus, and sigma minus into sigma plus. Out of these two terms that are having the same sign, that is the sigma plus and the sigma minus, they are basically adding the degree of oscillation. Like suppose if I want to draw a vector corresponding to this particular state, then when these terms have the same signs, it tends to rotate the vector in a similar direction, which result in a higher degree of oscillation. But on the other hand, sigma plus sigma minus and the that having opposite signs, they tend to cancel each other. The rotation tend to cancel each other, and what we have done is that we actually have a nearly stationary state. So in the point number three, when you are applying the RWA or the rotating wave approximation, what a rotating wave approximation actually does is that it cuts off or it drops off the higher oscillating terms, because we know that the average of the higher oscillating terms, basically the sinusoidal terms, it always zero, and we are only kept with the stationary terms. Okay, so you can see that sigma plus sigma minus and sigma minus sigma plus are kept over here, and the exponential term, we are defining the term delta here. Delta means that my sense of rotation or my degree of rotation is neglected to a great extent. That is it is diminished. It's a very small quantity. And omega 1 2, basically it's the frequency difference between the two qubits. Means omega 1 2 means omega 1 minus omega 2. It's also known as the relative frequency. And in the point number 4, when you are finally applying the condition of our gate, that is when you are resonating these two qubits, when you are taking the both the qubits frequency into a same point, it is omega 1 equal to omega 2, then this whole exponential term gets cancelled off. This e to the power 0 becomes 1, and we are left with this equation. You can see sigma plus sigma minus plus sigma minus sigma plus, and converting or denoting these particular states into their respective bias, that is x and y, we can clearly see that it's an interaction between x and y. Just have when I just mentioned in the point number 4 that it will make some sense as we will derive this particular equation. Basically, you can see that both my fermion states are indicating towards x and y bias. uh, still it is still it is not clear from the fact that my states are actually getting swept. So to clearly view this, we will rewrite this equation again. We will simplify this. Um, we'll move on to the further equation. So as we have, as I've said that we are simplifying this equation. So we have simplified now, and instead of what Lee has mentioned, the polymatrices, we have instead of defining the polymatrices, we have directly jumped into the states. The states we are really interested in, the 0 1 and 1 0. So you can see from this above equation is that my interaction Hamiltonian gets converted into the states, the 0 1 and 1. This is nothing but a combination of Ket and Bra, basically. So you can see that the Ket operator in the first, there is 0 1 state, the Ket operator is being mapped to the Bra operator, it is the 1 0. And again, after the plus symbol, the 1 0 operator is getting mapped to 0 1 operator. It's clearly giving a mathematical essence that my states have already been swept. And yes, so we are done with the our Hamiltonian part. And okay, and there is a very steep transition from this. Like we actually convert Hamiltonian into a matrix. That is again done by some rigorous mathematics. And moving on to the next slide, we can see that this entire Hamiltonian consisting of the x and y interaction has been converted into a matrix, a generalized matrix. You can see that this is a 4x4 matrix. And if you clearly look at this matrix, then you can see that the only term that is varying or that has the potential to vary is t, that is the time. So if you can fix the time to a certain value, then obviously this whole generalized matrix gets converted or gets reduced or gets simplified to a state or to a matrix, you can say, and that will give me a desired matrix of any particular gates. Like in this case, when I am applying a time period of, let's say, pi by 2g, then the cos terms become zero, as it is become cos of pi by 2, which is zero. Sine of pi by 2 becomes 1, and this entire generalized matrix gets reduced into this matrix, which is nothing but a matrix of I sub gate. Now here, at this very particular point, there's a corollary here. Like we need to maintain our gate time period. Like here, pi by 2g is my gate time period. We have to maintain our gate time period very precisely. Like if we instead of applying the time period of pi by 2g, if we apply, let's say, time period of pi by 2g plus minus of delta, then also the my generalized matrix gets simplified in a bit different way, and it gets converted into a matrix that might look some different like this than this, and we may not have attained the I sub gate. So while fabricating this particular gate, the time period has to be taken into care, its preciseness and all these. Okay, like for example, instead of applying the time period of pi by 2g, if I just half the time period, that is, I apply the pi by 4g, then the matrix that I will get is the matrix of root over I sub gate, not the I sub gate. Yes, my operating regime, the frequency tunability, and my gate time must be maintained very precisely. Okay, now as we have done with the explicit mathematical part, we'll part where we will show that how these both these states are behaving. Like there are basically, okay, so first of all, this is a x and y xy coordinate, and it's a basically a frequency versus the local magnetic flux of qubit 1, because we have considered the qubit 1 as our control state. Now when you are dealing with the two qubit gates in a quantum regime, we denote the two system as two state, that is one control state and one target state. Basically we uh, tune and we manipulate the control state, and according to that my target state gets changed, and all the analysis are get into the target state. This will be this will get more clear as we'll move into the CR gate. For now, just let's just look into this graph. Like this is the line graph of 1 0. You can see that it's orange graph. Yes, it's an orange graph. It's a leaning down graph, and 1 and 0 1 graph is the blue graph. And inference number 1 that can be drawn from this graph, that is at the point that is when phi equal to phi of I swap, this both these line graph tends to converge each other, and again it appears that they are facing some repulsion, and again they diverges from each other. Now what happens at the point at this particular point when phi equal to phi of I swap is that this is technically known as the level crossing region or the avoided crossing region. Why avoided? Because when these two line graphs tends to come each other, it avoids and it diverges. Now why it avoids? Let's say my two line graph intersect each other, like let's say, then at the point of the intersection, like this the particular at the particular point, when the point of interaction, both these energy states will attain a same value at the particular frequency and at the particular magnetic flux, which is not possible at all. It's ambiguous. Like we cannot generate we cannot degenerate the two energy levels at any particular frequency. If we do so, then there is no point of realizing a gate. The energy gap or the energy difference can't be same. So when these two line graphs tend to come near each other, they gets repelled by their own coupling rate, that is the G, that I have mentioned earlier in the derivation part, and it again gets divergence. So this was inference number 1, and inference number 2 that you can draw is that the nature of the graphs. Like before this point, when phi equal to phi of I swap, my orange line graph tends to leaning down, and my blue graph tends to move parallelly with respect to the x-axis, right? But after we have done with the phi I swap, after this point, you can see that both the nature of the graphs are getting exchanged. It means my blue graph is now leading down and my orange graph is become almost parallel to x-axis. That means that the graphical interpretation stands that my two states are getting swapped. Okay. So, and the third inference that you can draw is that the trajectory path. You can see that there is a black trajectory path that is moving along the 1 0, 1 0 here, and instead of moving to 0 1, it again moves to 1 0 point. Now that is some of some physical significance. It is beyond our scope right now. It's an advanced level stuff. But what I can draw from this point is that the place where it is getting turned, you can see that at the point of the avoided crossing region, it's turning back, right? So the time that it takes, the time that this particular trajectory takes to turn back is actually our gate time. So from this graph, we can actually visualize, or we can actually draw something that uh, my gate times are really short, and my gate times are really needed to be short in order to attain the higher effectivity. Okay. So can you just move to the next slide? Okay, so this was the inference that I just explained to you. And yes, we are done with this ISF gate. Now let's move to C phase gate, which will be explained by Stagnik.
Okay, so we'll be talking about the C-phase gate, and this is the unitary matrix for the C-phase gate. And why it's 4 cross 4 we had just explained, because there are 4 computational states, 0 0 0 1 1 0 and 1 1. So when you multiply it with the computational states, you'll be getting 4 cross 4, and so it will be, I mean, the matrix multiplication will be compatible. That's why we are having a 4 cross 4 matrix. And we can represent this in this notation. It's where this is the identity matrix and this is the Z gate. Now what the Z gate does is basically it keeps a 0 level fixed. Like if you pass a 0 level, it'll be 0, the output will be 0. But if you pass a 1 level, it'll be flipped to -1. So there'll be a phase addition of I pi. So I pi will be added, so it'll be -1. So this is the main function of the Z gate. And what this U phase gate does is that basically it applies a Z gate to the target qubit whenever the control qubit is in the excited state. So it's somewhat like the C0 gate, but it's just a CZ gate. So it applies the Z gate whenever the control qubit is in the excited state. So for 0 0 and 0 1 there'll be no effect, because in both these cases the control qubit is in the ground state. But for 1 0 and 1 1, the Z gate will be applied to the target qubit. But if you notice carefully, for 1 0, the target qubit is in 0 state, and what I had said earlier, that Z gate will do nothing to the 0 state, so there will be nothing. So 1 0 will be 1 0, but 1 1 will be flipped to -1 1 1, because in 1 1 the control qubit is in one state, so a Z gate will be applied to the target qubit, but the target qubit is also in the one state, so the Z gate will effectively add a phase of I pi, so it will be transformed to -1, and hence the entire state becomes -1 1. So this Z gate does this whenever there is 0 0 0 1 and 1 0, it will do nothing. But for 1 1, it will be basically flipping it, so -1 1. And this unitary operator for the C phase gate will appear naturally for capacitively coupled transmon qubits. And this will become more clear as we go to the next slides. But so basically, it's because we are in this C phase gate, we'll be implementing some higher energy levels, the higher excited states. Like we'll not only be concentrating on the 0 0 and 0 1 and all these states like in the ISWAP gate, but we'll be focusing on higher excited levels like 0 2 and stuff like that. Now, before we begin with it, we must understand very clearly what is this avoided crossing and level repulsion. So, as my co-presenter had said earlier, that because there is a finite coupling, so it's not possible to make them degenerate. Like if you tune the magnetic flux, there'll be a point when it appears that they will be becoming degenerate. There'll be like both energy levels will have the same energy, but that's ambiguous, right? Like they cannot have the same energy. Like in case of ISWAP, if 1 0 and 0 1 would have had the same energy, it's utterly bizarre. So that is why there'll be an avoided crossing or some kind of level repulsion, and so by tuning the flux of the first qubit, the energy levels are basically getting tuned, and the levels will basically repel each other, and that is why we have an avoided crossing or the level repulsion. And as I had said earlier, we are expecting some high energy levels, the higher excited states, not only the 0 and 1 levels, we'll be implementing some 2, 3, and some stuff like that. So this helps us to manifest the C-phase gate. So it will become more clear if we go through the simulation of this C-phase gate. Now, this is the ISWAP regime where you are implementing the ISWAP gate, but we are interested in the C-phase gate, right? So as you can see that this purple colored graph shows the 2-0 state. The 2-0 basically means that the first qubit is in the second excited state, and the second qubit is in the ground state. So we are tuning the magnetic flux, and this 2-0 state exhibits a kind of behavior like this. And as you can see, if you zoom this thing here, you'll be finding that this purple color line and this green color line, which is present in 1-1, they'll be repelling each other. So as if they'll try to converge, but then they'll not converge. They will diverge from here. And yeah, so we are defining a parameter called zeta. This will be helpful when we go through the mathematics of this simulation. So this is zeta, which is nothing but the difference between the frequencies of this omega, this black line, which is 10 plus 101. This is omega 01 plus omega 10 minus omega 11. So this is zeta, and this dashed lines is this thing 10 plus 01. And as you can see that there is a trajectory. So we are moving along this trajectory. We are changing the local magnetic flux of, say, the qubit 1. And as we are moving along this trajectory, this is the turning region after which it turns, and this is the point where the gate operation is actually being applied. And say we are representing this trajectory L as a function of tau, where tau is the gate time, so the time over which we are applying the gate. Okay, so yeah, this is the thing. Now if you basically prepare the state in 1-1 and then move it slowly towards the avoided crossing of 1 and 2-0, and then we wait for a time tau, which is the gate time, and then we move back. So this process must be adiabatic, and this process must be very slow. So we are clearly mentioning it that this must be slow. Now why this must be slow? It must be slow because if you move it very fast, then there is a possibility that my system might jump into unwanted higher excited states like 3-0, 3-1. So these are all possibilities, because we never said that we are only operating in a fixed regime. It might happen. So if you are moving it very fast, it might jump into higher excited states. It's quite possible. That is why we must carefully do this. So we must do this slowly, and because it's slow, automatically by thermodynamics, adiabatic, it's an adiabatic process. Now you can see that this is the U adiabatic. This is the matrix which we get after some algebraic and mathematical manipulations. And you can see that like there are terms like e to the power I theta 01, e to the power I theta 10, and so forth like this. So basically there are terms which are dependent on L. So all of them are dependent on the trajectory. And how we are defining theta is that theta ij is which is a function of L tau. So L tau is the trajectory. So this is the accumulated phase. Like if you are moving along this line, so there will be some amount of phase which is getting accumulated over time for both the qubits. So that I am representing by theta ij. And we can mathematically represent it in terms of an integral from 0 to tau, the time over which you are applying the gate, omega ij, which is a frequency, dt. So over time you're integrating the frequency which is changing. So you're tuning the flux, the frequency is changing, and over time you're integrating this, and this gives you the accumulated phase. This is important because these terms actually appear here. So theta 01, theta 10, theta 11, right? So I had mentioned that it must be adiabatic process, and I had also mentioned why it must be adiabatic, because it must be slow, because 1-1 never leaves the computational subspace. So if you make it very fast, there is a possibility that it might jump into higher states. So I don't want that, because if that happens, there might be unwanted leakage of information, and that is totally something which is unexpected when we're dealing in such a intricate regime. Okay, so this is the derivation of the unitary matrix. So we'll not go into the much detailed derivation. We'll focus on just the basics. So we had defined a parameter zeta earlier. This is the parameter zeta, which is the difference between frequencies of these states, the sum of these states. So the sum of the frequencies of these two states minus this frequency. So this is my zeta, omega 1 1 minus omega 0 1 plus omega 1 0. And you can take the other way around also. So basically we are concerned about the absolute value of zeta. So these thing actually we are integrating zeta over time. Now how zeta is a function of time? See, we are basically changing the flux that changes the frequency. Now this zeta, which is the difference between this between the energy levels, that is changing over time. And if you integrate that particular zeta over time, you'll be getting pi, because if you see here, this state, we are starting from here 1 1, and we are moving back to here. So there is ultimately a rotation, a phase rotation of pi. So that is why this integral must equate pi. Now this thing pi can also be written in terms of the accumulated phases. So I defined it earlier. So I can just say that theta 1 1 minus theta 0 1 plus theta 1 0. Now, so why we do this? Because this helps us to basically plug this theta 1 1 in terms of pi plus theta 0 1 plus theta 1 0 into the matrix which we had earlier derived here. This is the matrix. So we get these terms. Now this is very much beneficial to us, because you can see that there are two terms which are completely separate from the third term which is in the corner. So these are not like, we have full control over them, because this is theta 1 0, we have control over the first qubit. Theta 0 1, we have control over the first excited state of the second qubit. So what we do is we applied some single qubit pulses, some single qubit gates, and we exactly try to cancel out theta 0 1 and theta 1 0. So that's what we do. So we exactly try to cancel out theta 0 1 and theta 1 0, and when we do that, we get something like this. UC phase is this matrix. Why? Because this terms equals 1, this terms equals 1, and this terms equals e to the power I pi, which is minus 1. So ultimately my adiabatic matrix which we are derived is boiling down to this simple UC phase matrix. So this is what we had expected earlier, right? So this we do simply by applying some single qubit pulses. It's like single qubit phases, like single qubit gates. We just cancel out theta 0 1 and theta 1 0, and that's all. But there are some conflicts. There are some conflicts in this design. The conflicts are, we had said earlier that this must be an adiabatic process. Adiabatic operation requires that the process must be slow. I had said that earlier. But there is also a maximal limit in the fidelity of the gates. Why? Because see, if you are making the operation too slow, then there is a possibility that my system might slip into some noises, some decoherences. So basically some noises, it will slip into noises, and that is something which we do not expect. So what we do is that we try to make it as fast as possible so that these things do not happen. But these things are conflicting, because the first point requires the process to be slow, the second point requires the process to be fast, and these are conflicting, right? But this is resolved actually by experimentally. We can find out an optimal trajectory. We actually have an optimal G, optimal coupling rate. So that capacitive coupling, so it's nothing like they're coupled by a capacitor. So that G must be in this form, like G by 2 pi must equate 20 megahertz. So if you keep this G in this particular value, which is an experimental value, and in that case the tension between these two things will be resolved, and it will be in the minimal. Like we cannot completely do away with these points. These points will always be there, but we can keep it in a minima, right? Like you can think it like the product will be minimum. That's like, okay. So now this is the difference between ISWAP and C phase gate. As you can see clearly, this is the matrix of the ISWAP gate, and this is the matrix of the C phase gate. So here some imaginary terms like I are there, and here there are no such terms. This is one difference in the matrix. Also, the interaction type in ISWAP, it is XX plus YY. So it means nothing, that it just means that it is operating in the X and Y basis of the Bloch sphere, and the C phase is operating in the Z basis. Also, the region of operation for our ISWAP is this will be becoming much more clear if we see the graph here. So you'll be finding that this C phase operation takes place at a flux, a phi C phase, which is lower than phi ISWAP. Okay, and also this ISWAP operation takes place at a much lower frequency omega compared to the C phase, which takes place at a much higher frequency, and that's quite sensible, because we had said earlier that C phase will require some higher state and therefore some higher excited frequency states. Okay, so this is a difference in the regime of operation. So you can just say, like, if you are trying to implement a CFS gate or a ISWAP gate, if you're trying to implement a ISWAP gate, then it will always take after the CFS gate. So as Rahul had mentioned, that in the ISWAP gate we have to be careful about the time over which we are applying. So this is a very intricate thing. Like, the fabrication must be very delicate so that this time does not fluctuate, and so that matrix will take a proper form. Yeah, so this is about the flux
Yes,
state.
okay, okay. I will like to get into that simulation. Shagnik, can you please do
Yeah,
so?
sure, sure.
Okay, so as Leah mentioned that what is the optimal trajectory? Basically, optimal trajectory is that the dashed line that you can see here in the plot number B. You can see here the dashed line is basically you can see that at the initial stages when the magnetic flux is very low, it nearly aligns with the green graph. But as my magnetic flux increases, it gets deviated, and after certain time and after certain flux increasing a certain flux certain quantity of flux, it again gets aligned to the purple graph here. Now what I mean by optimal trajectory path is that the maximum time in which this dashed line is being closely aligned with any kind of any particular state. So that's the optimal trajectory path. You can see that at this point when just before the phi c phase here, this entire dash line is getting deviating. So my concept of optimal trajectory is getting hindered here. But and okay, so the main concern and the main point is that we have to achieve the maximum alignment with any kind of state. So that is basically the optimal point or the optimal trajectory. And also, if you look at the experimental value, that is G, which is nothing but the 40 pi megahertz. It's the frequency basically, and 1 by frequency. If we calculate the time period, that is 1 by frequency, 1 by 40 megahertz, then the time usually lies in the range of the nanoseconds. That's what the gate time should be, and that's the result of the
Yeah,
optimal trajectory.
it'll be approximately 100 nanoseconds, something like
Yes,
that.
yes, yes. It will be the scale of nanosecond, which is actually the scale of the gate time should be.
And it's quite evident that this gate time is very small. So that's what we wanted. Also, it's not very small so as to hinder my adiabatic operation. It's a bit slow also. It's
Yes, and if I don't follow the method of the optimal trajectory, my gate time can be very slow. It can be get into the microseconds also. So
Yep,
that obviously bring the coherence into the system, as Agnik has mentioned.
exactly. I think that clears it. And well, we are done with fluctuation ability.